Hello, readers. Hope everyone's having a great day. So, as promised, I am going to be reading book 1 of the Sleepy Hollow Incident. There we go. There's the book. Nice. I love my covers. I definitely do, as we all know. Sherry Foxley, cover designer. Absolutely fantastic cover designer. So, why am I reading book 1? Well, I'm reading book 1 because I did some character introductions late last year in 2025. I was supposed to start reading this at the end of 2025, but hey, life happens. Things happen. Things go on that you can't control, so you just got to adjust. So here we go. I'm going to go through book 1. Now, more than likely, as I go through this, I may be stopping, giving like little insights, little tidbits into the writing process, maybe what I was thinking like during that time of writing. And when I did the character introductions, we introduced Jerry Hardwood, we introduced Detective Stephen Carver, and we definitely introduced Ren. As most of you know, if you know me, he has been my favorite character to write to date. He's just absolutely classic, and where his character goes and throughout this book just kind of blew me away. As I always say, I'm just typing. I'm like the reader, I'm discovering things just as you are as well, especially when writing such a long novel where it's going. I have an idea. I know the beginning of the novel. I know the end of the novel, how the meat of that and how it gets there is really flying by the seat of my pants. So it's exciting to me as it is for the reader. When I write shorter novels, though, or shorter works, it's like I outline them quite a lot. But with longer books, no. And for those of you who don't know, first of all, my name's Petey Oliva, and if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be uploaded there. But for those of you who don't know, there are 4 books in this series. However, not really a series, it's a serial. So it's just a continuation. Book 2 picks up where book 1 left off, and so on and so forth, up to book 4. So it is really just one nice long novel, and I'm personally speaking, I love long novels. I mean, think It, The Stand, Swan Song, think books like that. Yeah, to me, it's like when you have a long book, you're in a long-term relationship with the book, with the story, with the characters, and all that good fun stuff. So I do love myself a long book. So not bad at all. Sorry for the dogs. You'll probably hear them. They'll probably bark every once in a while. Oh, but it won't. They'll calm down sooner or later. That is a definite fact. So, of course, shorter works, I look at it kind of like a summer fling. You get into a relationship, you're enjoying, boom, 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 it's over, it's done, on to the next relationship. With longer books, you get more involved in the depth and the characters. Kind of like what your mood is going for, at that particular time. But I do enjoy myself a nice long book. Probably why I wrote a nice long book too. So we're reading book 1. Therefore, in the future, I could do more character introductions to this is going out on my Substack newsletter, and this is most specifically for my subscribers, and then doing more character introductions, getting you to absolutely love this book. 'Cause it is definitely the best book that I've written to date. I do 100% agree with that. And what I'm more than likely going to be doing is that we go through it is kind of like stopping here and there, giving you some insights into what was going on in my brain during that time. So I hope you don't mind that, but I think it's kind of cool. When I'm a reader, I would like to know what the author was thinking while they were writing particular scenes, particular characters, all that good fun stuff. So we're going to start, and more than likely I'm going to be doing this every Thursday. This is going to be our Thursday thing, and putting out, it could be 2 to 3 chapters, could be 5 chapters, kind of depends on how long those chapters are. I got my water here, so hopefully I'll be nice and hydrated and, not have to worry about dry mouth after speaking for so long. But if we get there, it is what it is. When I was a kid, we grew up a little bit poor. A lot of poor. Anyway, sometimes parents couldn't pay the electric bill. The old Con Ed. What do you think I am, Con Ed? Couldn't pay the electric bill, the power would go out, and I would read stories to my younger brothers. Or I would actually create stories by a candlelight or flashlight with my younger brothers. And then it was always like Yeah, I love doing that, and that's kind of like what I see with that. Now, what I should do, I'll be getting the green screen in soon, but I do have a painting that I'm putting up there. I just moved into a new place, so everything's in a little bit disarray, but I do have a painting that's going to be in the back, and I think it is my favorite painting. It reminds me of myself. I definitely connect with the painting, and by next week it'll be up there. I just got to go get some Hercules hooks over at probably Walmart this weekend and put that up. If not, we'll do green screen. I could do green screen as well. So, I mean, we'll figure it out, though. So, please excuse the aesthetics. Of course, as you see back there is my Yoda puppet from Empire Strikes Back. It's a hat my dad wore over there. Over here is a hat I had done for my first published book, Indifference, which is about a misdiagnosed paranoid schizophrenic who discovers he has the powers to heal other people. And further over there, you'll see our Substack, the PD's Alternative Fiction. That's my desk. That's where the magic happens. Let's see, the computer's there, all that good fun stuff. I got a bunch of books that I've read. I like to have a nice aesthetic, nice vibe going when I'm writing my novels. So you're like in the writer's den at this point. So that's pretty badass, my opinion. Anyway, we're going to get on with it. You got questions about what I'm writing, anything like this, once this Substack gets out there, please feel free to leave comments down below, and I will be looking at them and answering them and all that good fun stuff. So any comments, questions, concerns, anything like that. Some of what I'm going to be reading is going to have some graphics to it, graphic violence and gore. So you got to be over 18 to join this Substack, to be on this Substack. Reader beware. I don't give trigger warnings. Not going to give trigger warnings. I understand trigger warnings and why they exist. I am a trauma therapist after all. But it's a horror book, so anything goes. Be prepared. I love you. So let's go. The Sleepy Hollow Incident by P.D. Oliva. Part 1. Sleepy Hollow, New York, February 1997. Whew. Let's go back. All right, so I first wrote this story in 1997, and it was a screenplay at that time. A few years later, I wrote it as a full-length novel. It was about 150,000 words. Both of those were destroyed in what I consider the great laptop tragedy of 2005, which I'm glad, actually, tell you the truth, breath of fresh air, because this is the book I wanted to write back then, but was not mature enough to write. So not mature enough as a writer to get it done. So just so you know that information, because as I go through the book, I'm more than likely going to reference certain characters that were not included or not part of the original story. Just so you know. And also that's why I wanted to keep the date of 1997. Plus I'm a 90s grunge kid, so anything in the 90s I'm gonna love to do. So let's go back. Part 1, Sleepy Hollow, New York, February 1997. The winter storm arrived with a vengeance and seemed to come out of nowhere. Sheets of snow blanketed a small parking lot as FBI agent Henry Clavell parked his rented SUV. He had no business in Sleepy Hollow other than personal, but he'd been drawn into a situation that was beyond his understanding. He'd made the trek all the way from the Hamptons to the small riverside town of Sleepy Hollow, all to help a friend at the request of the mother. He waited in his SUV, watching the red and blue lights troll across the shabby, single-story motel. Why a woman with such prominent background would choose to stay in what was clearly a trap house for local addicts was beyond his comprehension. It made no sense to him. Firefighters, policemen, and paramedics stood around the open motel room door, most of them with startled expressions, lost in maddening thought over what they'd seen in the room with the door wide open. Captain Flannery appeared in the doorway, obviously staring in Henry's direction, waiting for him. That's my cue, Henry thought. Henry climbed out of his SUV, his heart hammering like a rabbit in his chest. When he first received the phone call from Flannery, he wished he'd never come to Sleepy Hollow. It's true that no good deed goes unpunished. True, because here he was. In the middle of a murder scandal he was certain would become a new chapter in Sleepy Hollow's lore. He locked eyes with Flannery, who waved him over before stepping back inside. From Henry's vantage point, he could see there was little light in the room. It looked like a deep black hole that he did not want to cross. But he knew he had to. He'd come this far and was so involved in the situation there was no possible method he could find to turn and go home and forget about Sleepy Hollow. Forget Laurie Francone, the reason he'd come in the first place. Henry held his coat close to his throat as he walked to the room, snow pelting him in every direction. Noticed the awestruck stare in the eyes of the officer who stood outside the room. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, or he was about to puke. Henry always had difficulty deciphering the two. It was dark inside the motel room, although not total darkness. Flannery had a small light set up in the corner that did its best to illuminate the gruesome scene. "I got more lights coming," said Flannery, standing beside the bed and staring at Henry. Henry had no love for Captain Flannery. In fact, he understood the captain's skepticism about Henry's arrival, considering the string of bodies that blanketed his town since Henry first walked into Sleepy Hollow. But that was just coincidence. Although Henry knew how police officers think, they don't believe in coincidence. Henry met Captain Flannery when he went to speak with the officer in charge of the case, Detective Stephen Carver, about his friend Laurie Francone. Unfortunately, Detective Carver hasn't been seen since yesterday, adding to the mounting pile of suspicions in Captain Flannery's brain. Henry had no response. He was too preoccupied with taking in the scene. There was a body beneath the bedsheet. The sheet was stained with blood, but not just a blood stain here and there, and not one thick and round blood stain resigned to one specific area. No, the sheet was stained with blood from what must be head to toe from the body beneath the sheet. He wondered if it was Laurie who was under there. Flannery's cover-up of the body confirmed what Henry already knew. Flannery suspected Henry was responsible for the murder. He wants to see my reaction when he pulls off the sheet. The storm howled outside the room, cold and menacing, and Henry's blood turned cold in his veins. He raised his eyes to Flannery's, who raised his eyes to the ceiling. Henry followed the gaze. His body twitched inward when he took in the sight above him. The ceiling was painted red with blood, and the blood was moving like a snake across the ceiling, slithering with thick crimson droplets that dropped to the floor. "Now, how do you think that happened?" "It's like the blood is still alive," said Flannery, staring at Henry with that skeptical stare. So ready for the big reveal, Henry was certain the man was excited, as if he'd caught whoever was responsible. Caught him because to Flannery, the murdering son of a bitch who painted that ceiling red was standing in front of him. But wait, there's more. Flannery pulled off the sheet like a magician tosses off a curtain to reveal the magic behind it. Henry's jaw dropped. The body was gutted from throat to navel and hollowed out. There was no blood in the body. It was all on the ceiling. And no organs, just an empty, wide-open body. Henry immediately turned away, grinding his jaw when he saw on the dresser, across the room, all the organs that were removed from the body lined up perfectly and neatly across the top. A pentagram stained the mirror above the dresser, written in blood. Henry noticed one of those blood droplets dripped from the ceiling to the liver sitting center stage. "We haven't found the heart," said Flannery. "Maybe you could help us locate it." Henry turned his stare to Flannery. He could give a shit about Flannery's skepticism. He didn't do this, and that's all the truth he required. Henry said nothing in response. What could he say, anyway? It's better to have a lawyer present when he's questioned by Flannery. As we all know, anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, and we all know how twisting someone's words can lead to a conviction. He was an FBI agent, after all. "Is this your girl?" asked Flannery. Henry could feel the captain's eyes burning a hole through him. Henry had been so preoccupied staring at the hollowed-out body, he hadn't yet looked at the face that had been battered and beaten to a bloody pulp, destroying all recognizable features. The bones were crushed, as if someone used a rock to bludgeon the corpse. The hair was short, cut just above the ears and stained red with blood. The eyes were missing. The body style was short, too, and husky. Henry knew who it was, but it wasn't who Flannery thought it was. Henry shook his head and said no through a closing throat. Flannery lifted a flashlight from his belt, clicked it on, and shined the light towards Henry's feet. Recognize that size 6? Next to Henry's feet were footprints, small, bloodied footprints, and yes, Henry recognized the footprint. Ironically, he'd seen the same this afternoon. They led into the parking lot when we first arrived. Good luck for whoever they belonged to, considering the storm buried them before we could follow where they went. Henry looked at Flannery. No, he said, moving his head from left to right. Lots of no's at the moment. Something like that, Henry said under his breath. He wasn't sure why he was lying. Quite obvious to him the truth would see the light of day, but he had to. That was the only way he could find Laurie before Flannery put all the pieces together. And considering the body's condition, he could always use the excuse that it was too mangled to recognize who it was. Take a moment, Detective. Get a breath of fresh air. I'll speak to you in a minute. Henry had no reply. He simply turned around and stepped outside into the snow, his head down, following the trail those size 6s made. There were 2 additional footprints outside the room, although the snow was falling fast to conceal them. They were pointed in one direction. His eyes roamed to the western woods surrounding the motel, so dark and quiet. Sassafras and oak trees swayed in the wind, with their bare branches stretching like veins into the night sky, to the heart of the crescent moon above. The woods creaked and moaned as if in mourning, and a thick fog drifted between the trees. A squealing, chattering screech yelped across the woods and sent a shudder through his bones. He scanned across the woods, hoping to see a light or movement in the moonlight that would tell him where Laurie had gone. That was her size 6, and the woman lying dead in the room was her mother. End of chapter. Chapter 2. I'll drink of water. Laurie kept hearing voices. Or was it the wind howling through the trees in the western woods? When she first started her trek into the woods, the fog drifted between the trees and seemed to call to her, begging her to enter. The moon was prominent in the night sky, as if the overcast sky that had blanketed Sleepy Hollow all day provided a reprieve for the moon to watch over the hollow. But the moment she stepped into the woods, the first snowflake danced in front of her eyes. The trees creaked, bending to the wind, as if someone wrenched and wrung those tree trunks until all they could do was groan to the moon, like the final gasp from the dead releases all of life's hardships. A chattering echo erupted across the trees, and Laurie's heart jumped in her chest, although she refused to allow those sounds to deter her mission. She paused to take a better look at what lay ahead. The last thing she wanted was to get lost in the woods. Legend has it they were haunted by the souls who met their death in these woods over the centuries. But Laurie knew differently. The woods were haunted by their own memory of the dead, as if it sought to raise them from the depth of the subconscious to release them forever. But with no power to do so, they walked through the woods, angry and willing others to join them. The snow blanketed the scene, and Laurie squinted to see as far as possible, looking for direction, the light in the darkness that would confirm she was on the right path. She tucked her bare hands into the crook of her arm, standing, staring, searching. "Release me," the wind whispered. "Release me." She felt a hand brush across the nape of her neck, and she spun around to the ghost that rushed through her bones with a snap of its jaw. Her heart tensed, her bones constricted, and her breath caught in her throat. She turned on a dime, watching the apparition disappear into the woods. "Release me." The voice faded with the ghost. Her hand went to her chest when her heart jumped from the screech from high above. The great horned owl stretched its wings and hissed at Laurie, its stare held firmly in her direction. Its mouth was gaping, screeching and hissing before lifting off the branch in the same direction as the ghost. Laurie swallowed that breath that caught in her throat, watching the owl disappear into the snow. She took a step forward, then another, and kept moving. I'm on the right path, she thought. She was hoping she'd see it soon, the light, the single flame that burned just for her, in the window where no light was allowed. The light she was told would be waiting. Hallucinations, mind control, manipulation. That's how the demon worked. He made you feel like you lost your mind. An effort to create confusion in the minds of his victims. Confusion for Mark, too. Mark was Laurie's ex-fiancé and the reason she returned to Sleepy Hollow. She came to reconcile, to understand why he wrote the letter that ended their relationship. She came to find him, because there was still love in her heart for the man she agreed to marry. Tragedy being the catalyst that robbed Lori of her happily ever after. She knew now that if it weren't for Mark, she'd be dead already, which is why she was walking through the woods in the middle of a snowstorm in the middle of the night. Too many people have suffered for the love they shared, even Lori's mother, although Lori concluded she'd gotten what she deserved. The rest were innocent. Their only mistake was bearing witness to the manifestation of a loving heart, recognizing beauty the moment it blossomed. She had to get to Mark. She knew where he lived, the old house in the middle of the western woods, the house that was more than 200 years old. Lori knew it was abandoned and neglected, much like Mark was when she saw him earlier. He looked so different, as if someone had claimed a permanent space in his brain and changed the way he looked. So many changes have occurred over the last 6 months. Lori couldn't put her finger on when the changes began. Was it before or after the accident? Or maybe the change had always been there, waiting to be discovered. Her hands were freezing, the cold nipping at her skin. She could hardly feel her face, it was so cold. And the moon cast shadows across the trees that Lori was certain were waiting for her, watching the track, knowing her presence was required. She took a step up a small incline, and lo and behold, the light was there. So faint and subtle, the candle burned in the window. Burning in the window of Mark's dilapidated house, but so far off in the distance, her heart tensed in her chest. Other than the candle, the house was dark, foreboding, cast in the moonlight where the snow seemed to disappear. It seemed to call to her, as if she was a requirement the house had yet to claim. Good thing for Lori, the incline leveled out, and she could trek through the woods on safer ground. Release me. The apparition stood between the trees, watching her, angry, determined, haunted. I am, she hollered with a whine in her voice. She pulled the wool beanie over her ears and moved forward through the trees, all the while keeping her eyes on the light. Everything led up to this moment, and she needed to confront Mark and his demon. Because what would you do if someone sold their soul to save your life? Would you give them yours in return? And here we are, close to Valentine's Day, right? Would you sell your soul? Would you give your soul to someone else? If you had to, if you knew it was going to change their life or save their life, would you do it? Good questions, right? Without a doubt, if I knew my wife was in trouble, I would, without a doubt. Yeah. Anyway. First 2 chapters. It was important for me to begin the story in the middle. Right? I love story in media res. It's just brilliant. It's like hit them hard in the beginning, and then let's go through this backstory and what led up all the way to this moment. Yeah, it was important to me. Plus, as a writer, you want to hook the reader. You want to bring them in, right? I hope I brought you in, right? Who the hell knows? Only you know that information, but you get where I'm going here, right? Now we get to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is 6 months prior, all right? And it says that, 6 months prior. So there's no worried about it. No worries about it. Nice. Here we go. Chapter 3, 6 months prior. Brilliant and disturbed. That was Lori's first impression of Mark. She fell in love at first sight. Plus, he was the polar opposite of the people Lori normally associated with. He was poor but proud, living in a small 2-bedroom apartment, the same apartment where he grew up, and how or why he continued to live there was something Lori could never understand, considering the only lesson his mother ever taught him was that sometimes the people you love don't love you. His mother died when he was 14. She slashed her wrist in the back room. Mark's father was away on business. He was always away on business when she opened a river of blood across her wrist. Lori could never imagine the 14-year-old Mark when he discovered his mother on that fateful morning. A thought she wished to not have inside her brain, but what she could never shake was his expression when he told her the story. So much pain at such an early age. Mark once told her how his mother would force him to wait in the car while attending the many dive bars across Sleepy Hollow, drinking into the early morning hours, and how sometimes she would forget he was there when she finally made her way home. Sometimes with a man, not his father, of course. And sometimes so drunk, Mark would be surprised he even made it home. Always a ghost, Mark had said, as if I was invisible. No one, nothing. And Laurie's heart sank deeper into love with him. She wanted to protect him, to allow him to understand what love truly was, because if she could do that, the world would be a better place. Mark's father was another story. All indications revealed he was a good man, although his employment seemed more important to him than his son, and how anyone could live like that was beyond Laurie's understanding. Mark's father passed away a few years ago, a few months before Laurie met Mark in a tea room off Broadway in Tarrytown, the small riverside town that used to share the same name as Sleepy Hollow. He died of a heart attack while attending church services early on a Sunday morning. Mark said the heart attack was unexpected. His father was in good health, and the doctor who completed the autopsy indicated that it seemed his heart had taken a jolt, as if he had literally been scared to death. Mark was 25 when Laurie met him. Laurie was a year older. But those tragedies brought Mark to love ferociously and to live passionately. He was a writer, making his living writing a small column for the Sleepy Hollow Gazette. The pay was meager, but he loved what he did, and considering the two-bedroom apartment was subjected to rent control, he was able to make proper financial decisions to stay in the apartment, which his father had bequeathed to him after his passing. Plus the view of the Tappan Zee Bridge that stretched its steel across the Hudson River was what Mark had told Laurie were like old friends he could always confide in, because they listened when all everyone else wanted to do was hear themselves talk. His dream was to write novels that would change the world, someday at least, and his writing was good, really good. His words danced across the page and directly into the reader's heart. Laurie had moved to Sleepy Hollow 6 months after a horrible breakup. She was glad she found that son of a bitch cheating. To Laurie, he did her a favor, because she finally chose to leave her home in the Hamptons and get away from her mother, someone she could barely stand to be in the same room with for more than an hour. Pompous, opinionated, and manipulative was Laurie's mother, Alina. The Francone family was always revered in high society social circles, and when the family business was willed to people outside the family, Laurie's father, Claude, was given an offer he couldn't refuse, and relinquished all claims any lawyer with a brain would take on to get a piece of the family fortune. Instead, they took the money and ran. Good thing Claude's cousin Frederick had amassed wealth so abundant the Francone family name would be known for centuries, and Claude made sure his deal was sweet. Unfortunately, he passed less than a year after cashing in, leaving Laurie under the thumb of her mother. With no siblings to share the pain and no distant relatives, Laurie understood she was the last in what had been a long line of Francones. Laurie rented an antique shop in Sleepy Hollow and moved on to the top-floor apartment without knowing a soul. If you want to forget the past, it's better to have no one to rehash it with, allowing those memories to wash away with the tide while you build new ones with your new life so you can be who you want and not the manifestation of the past. A month after she moved in, she met Mark in that tea room. It started with a simple hello from Mark on his way out the door. He asked her if he'd met her before, an obvious pickup line, but Laurie didn't care. She couldn't take her eyes off his baby blues. They carried depths she wanted to discover for herself. Their meeting was short but profound, and a month later, ironically, Mark made his way into Laurie's antique shop. He purchased the monstrosity of an armoire, and Laurie agreed to help him move it to his apartment. I'm sure you don't need to know any more, because this isn't a love story, it's a horror story. Although all great horror stories begin the same, with an undying love that'll wrench the heart and squeeze until all the love is drained from the organ, and all that's left is a hollowed-out, withered, and dying heart. Time went on between them, and Laurie knew he wanted to tie the knot, as did Laurie. She'd give up everything. Alina had informed Laurie that should she marry Mark, there would no longer be a seat at the table for Laurie Francone Saduch, Mark's surname, and live in the two-bedroom apartment together forever, living the simple life, peacefully and passionately. Laurie had a feeling he was going to pop the question, and soon. When he informed Laurie that he had rented a cabin in the mountains for a weekend getaway, she was certain this was it, certain that the weekend would live in the lore of their relationship for all their days, a time they would tell their grandkids about. How right she was. But not the grandkids part, because that hope was never meant to manifest. Nope, not at all. But the day will forever be ingrained in Laurie's mind, not as the perfect day when she agreed to be his wife, but as the day when life changed on a dime, and all of life's horrors came crashing down in a wallop across the head. Sooner or later, we all must confront the past and the demon waiting in the forest of our mind, itching to be born. Got to give some backstory, a little tidbit about how they met. Keep on going, right? Chapter 4. It was a Saturday in late August. Laurie woke up early to find Mark was already up, sitting outside with a 5-subject notebook and a felt pen in his right hand, writing feverishly as he sat at a picnic table outside the cabin they'd rented. The weather was cool. The morning dew glistened across the hills and grass, but with a heat beneath the surface that Laurie knew would take hold in a fever by midday. She fixed herself a cup of coffee from the pot Mark had made. Considering there was only 1 cup left, Laurie knew Mark had been up for more than a few hours. He did that often, getting up way before the sun to write. He entered a different world when he had that pen in his hand and his notebook out, and Laurie didn't want to interrupt him. Not that he would be angry with her by any means necessary, but when Mark was in that mindset, any conversation you had with him was null and void. According to Mark, it wasn't him answering or taking part in the conversation, but one of his characters. Mark considered himself a method writer and told Laurie that once he was in the story, he was the character. Laurie was grateful he never wrote horror novels. She noticed the bottle of Anisette on the kitchen counter, and she turned to the sliding glass door that led outside to the patio, watching Mark, his pen dancing across the page. I need water. When I was younger, I used to write in a 5-subject blue 5-subject notebook. So I had to put in there. And when I'm writing, I'm in that trance too. And I've spoken to other writers, and they're in that trance as well. So don't ask questions. I tell my kids, you can't ask me, hey, Dad, can I go here? Can I get $5 or $10? No, because I'm not answering, and I'm just somewhere else. Wait until I pop out of it, and then you can ask me whatever question you want. Anyway, I'll read the last line. She noticed a bottle of Anisette on the kitchen counter, and she turned to the sliding glass door that led outside to the patio, watching Mark, his pen dancing across the page. Laurie stretched her eyelids, allowing some air into those gelatinous eyeballs, an attempt to shake the sleepy cobwebs from her brain before she gripped the bottle of Anisette. Guess we're starting early today, Laurie said to herself, twisting the cap and adding a shot to her coffee. Stirred, then opened the slider when a fresh wallop of damp air wrapped around her. Mark hadn't noticed. He kept writing. He had a towel on the table that was moist with morning dew. His notebook was on the towel and a cup of coffee next to the notebook. He loved writing with a simple pen and notebook, no computer required. When the time came to send the manuscript to publishers and agents, he'd type all those words onto a clean page with a typewriter his father had bought him when he was 12. She offered to buy him a desktop computer, but he refused. I don't know if I'd get used to it, he told her. The creative process might take a hit with all that tapping of keys. To which Laurie gave a shrug, followed by an okay then. However he wrote his books was no consequence to her. Laurie walked over to the table and noticed there was no coffee in his cup, just a clear liquid. She guessed he had started really early this morning. She took a seat opposite him at the table. He continued to write feverishly. She took a sip, holding her mug in both hands, staring over the Adirondack Mountains, bathed in greens and browns, rolling and sloping across the landscape. Crickets and birds sang as if to pay homage to the Mother Nature. It seemed like time stopped out here among the hills, stopped to provide a moment where life's persistence came to a screeching halt, allowing the mind to process and release the anxieties of everyday living. Mark's feverish writing stopped abruptly. Laurie looked at him, his head down, staring at his short, dark hair. He always wore it short, his hair a Caesar cut that few men could pull off and still look good thanks to his tall, yet thin body frame. At least that's what the barber said. He sat there with his pen in his right hand, hovering over his notebook. His left hand glided across the page. Obviously, he was reading what he wrote as a smile crept across his lips and he lifted his head, lifting those baby blues to Laurie. He cocked his eyebrows. Now that was satisfying. Laurie laughed. New book? Mark sat upright. That it is. Then silence as Mark gazed over the landscape. He was typically quiet after writing. He always said he needed to decompress, to rise from the abyss of creativity where he swam underwater for hours, finally releasing a thick, heavy breath when he resurfaced. He needed time to reassemble himself into the reality of mountains, terrain, streets, and people with beating hearts and blood in their veins, and leave behind, until the next day at least, when he'd dive right back into the fictional realm, the world that existed on the page. They sat in silence for a while before Laurie said, "So, what's on the agenda for today?" Mark smiled as a glint ran across those baby blues. "Well," he said, gripping the handle on his mug, "I have a feeling it's going to be a great day. I figure we can go for a hike this afternoon. We have dinner reservations at 7, and then..." He paused as if he hadn't thought past dinner. "Let's go for a walk around the lake. Sound good? Or we could go white water rafting instead of hiking. I'll leave that up to you." Laurie responded without a moment's pause. "White water rafting," she said. "Definitely." She finished her coffee. "Sounds perfect. We should get ready then. Rafting in these parts is usually packed. The earlier we get going, the better. Plus, it'll give us some more time before dinner to rest up." He flipped his notebook closed, and Laurie noticed the title on the front cover, written in red ink with thick letters. Holler is what it read. Laurie looked at it perplexed, her brow knitted in confusion. Mark writes romance novels, and she thought the title was strange for a romance novel, unless he crossed a line into erotica. But the word was spelled wrong. There should be 2 L's. It's Holer. Obviously, holler has 2 L's. There should be 2 L's. He clipped his pen to his shirt collar, then stood up, holding his notebook. "I'm going to get ready. Been out here for a while and I feel all buggy. A shower is definitely required." Laurie stood up. "Me too," she said as a smile crossed her lips. "Maybe we can take that shower together." Mark offered his hand, and Laurie took it. "My lady, I wouldn't have it any other way. Just think of the water we'll be saving." To which Laurie stated, "Depends on how long we'll be in the shower." "Indeed," said Mark, with a cock of his brow. They went to the door and Mark slid the slider open. She stepped inside when Mark looked over his shoulder. She waited for him, dropping her mug on the kitchen counter. He seemed distracted, staring into oblivion. "What is it?" Mark looked left then right before turning around. "Nothing. I thought I heard something." She noticed he held his notebook tight against his chest. She gestured to the bathroom and Mark followed when she asked, "So, what's the new book about? What ladies are you romancing now?" "None," he said. "This is a horror book." Dun-dun. Nice. 4. Go 5. We're going to do one more chapter. And then next week we'll continue. All right, so chapter 5. Here we go. The state psychiatric ward was buzzing with the crazies. Something got into them, some demon, and they were all howling and crying and screeching and clawing at their skin. It turned the hospital into a literal nut house. Behavioral health technicians scurried frantically, attempting to secure every patient. They already used 4-point restraints on 4 patients and there were no more on the ward. Instead, they insisted on physically restraining every patient while the nurse jabbed their arms with Thorazine. It seemed like something out of a horror novel. Some patients ran into walls, some lashed out, attempting to bloody those poor technicians. Every single one of the 30 patients had lost their fucking minds. Dr. Lester received word of the uprising while eating his lunch, tuna fish, and immediately left that sandwich on his desk before taking the elevator to the basement ward. He knew what it was. That damn Wren was up to his old tricks again, whispering to the crazies and driving them into a frenzy. He did that every once in a blue moon, and considering there was a blue moon on the rise tonight, Lester wasn't surprised. I need water. Wren was a lifelong resident at the state hospital in New York. He'd been there since his 27th birthday, after he was found not guilty by reason of insanity for the murder of 3 teenagers in 1982. Although Wren presented coherent and sane during his trial, sometimes insanity can bleed over into sophistication. Think Hannibal Lecter, for Pete's sake. Wren had above-average intelligence, coupled with an uncanny desire to eat human hearts. He once stated that the consumption of the organ brought the person's essence into the fold of his being. His words, not mine. He also stated that he was capturing souls for the master, though he would never say who this master was, other than offering a few biblical references that made absolutely no sense. He reported he'd been to hell and damnation, which is where his taste for human hearts originated. Said he'd traveled there after he stared into the eyes of a demon when he was 12 years old. He also said the demon groomed him during his time in foster care. That statement alone was exploited by Wren's defense attorney. He thinks he comes from hell. What else do you need to recognize this man is insane? Wren's testimony was enough. All right. Gets to you. Wren's testimony was enough to convince even the DA that Wren was clinically insane. Instead of the embarrassment of an acquittal, the DA offered life in the state hospital. Let them figure out when he was safe to return to society. Dr. Lester assured him that Wren never would. Lester had a personal interest in the case. One of Wren's victims was a girl Lester's daughter went to high school with. He promised to never allow Wren to see the city streets ever again. Once a murdering son of a bitch, always a murdering son of a bitch. And Lester wasn't about to sign on the dotted line and stake his reputation that Wren would never murder again. Wren had been a ward of the state ever since, and that's exactly where Lester wanted him. Not that Wren could care. He seemed comfortable on the ward, as if he'd come home, although Lester was convinced that Wren was waiting for something, some unknown time in the future when he could stretch his wings and rekindle his murdering impulse. If patience was a virtue, that murdering son of a bitch Wren was the most virtuous fucker who ever walked the earth. Although his confinement didn't come with a happy ending. Wren may have been incarcerated and locked away in a basement, but his murdering itch was satisfied on rare occasions. Lester suspected Wren had played a central role in at least 6 suicides since his admission and more than a few cracked skulls. Always whispering was Wren. At least that's what Lester's patients would tell him. They could hear Wren whispering in the wee hours of darkness, and it drove them into a frenzy. The recipient of said cracked skulls being the orderlies every time they got a little too close. Now Lester's ward was turned into a madhouse, and the last thing he needed was another replay from the summer of '91. Not a chance. He lost 3 residents that day, 4 orderlies and 2 nurses. He rolled his tongue inside his cheek, watching the elevator tick down to the basement. Give the whole fucking ward a shot of Thorazine and shut them all up until tomorrow. He looked up, grinding his jaw. Start with that son of a bitch. He could hear the chaos before the doors opened. Get ready. Once those doors opened, he was immediately assaulted by a patient who barreled into him with lightning speed. Lester fell backward, slamming into the elevator. He's waiting for you, screamed Clarice when she snatched his face in her hands, inching her nails into his flesh. Yipping, screeching, and gawking rattled through the open door as Lester tried to pry Clarice's fingers from his face. But she kicked him in the balls and then racked him across the head with a fist that should have felt like a fly, she was so small, but instead dropped him to the elevator floor. He looked up quickly, her talons about to claw into his eyes as the elevator doors started to close. Jesus Christ, if that door closes, I could be locked in here with her. But, as luck would have it, Desmond caught the door before it closed and wrapped his large arms around Clarice, snatching her in his grip. Thank God for good orderlies. Lester was certain he was about to meet Jesus himself. Clarice struggled in Desmond's arms, wriggling to free herself, as Lester clawed to his feet. 4-point restraints immediately, Lester ordered. They're all done, hollered Desmond. Nurses are giving out Thorazine shots. He shuffled with Clarice to the elevator door. It's a madhouse. Something's gotten into them, but only a few have been violent. The rest are all just nuts and howling. Lester held the door open as Clarice screamed and jumped, attempting to free herself from Desmond's iron grip. In a room, then. I'll get the shot. Desmond wrangled Clarice, trolling down the hall as she screamed and wailed, thrusting her head back, attempting to smash Desmond's nose into oblivion. Lester looked around the ward. Patients were in full bloom, pacing and rocking and running and howling, chattering and screeching at the top of their lungs. Some climbed over furniture, and a few tossed pages from magazines and newspapers across the hall. 3 patients were trying to wrench the television off the wall, while others just sat and watched, as if they were tuned in to a nightly show. Lester made a beeline for the nurses' stations, where he used his key to unlock the door. Betty Singer, a nurse who started a month ago, was filling syringes with a trembling hand. "Keep loading up," said Lester. "We might as well have a good night tonight." Betty looked at him with panic-stricken eyes. "Welcome to the nut house, Betty." Her only response was a dropped jaw. He grabbed the nearest filled syringe. "Send an orderly to Wren's room when you're done filling syringes. Hand them out to the nurses. One for each patient. Let's shut them all up." "But, sir, Wren is the only patient not acting out. We need—" "Don't tell me what we need, Betty. Wren is the reason they're all acting like this. Once we take him out of the picture, they'll calm down." Now she looked at him like he was insane. "Trust me," he said, when a patient slammed into the door and Lester jumped while Betty dropped the syringe. Lester looked at her, then the ward and all the crazies, although orderlies were close to non-existent, a few here and there scattered about, grabbing patients in iron grips while the nurse provided the injection before the orderly wrangled the patient back to the room, only to return soon after. At least the patients weren't violent. Mostly just howling and throwing stuff or hurting themselves, most of them at least. It's a distraction, he thought, thinking about Wren. Lester turned to Betty. "Call a code red, all hands on deck. We're going to need reinforcements." She was hiding beside the desk, syringe now in hand, shaking, trembling. "Did you hear me?" A tear rolled down her cheek and she nodded as Lester reached towards her. "I'll take that, Betty. Just make the call and do me a favor when you get home tonight." He took the syringe. "What's that?" "Choose a different profession." He dashed out of the room, forgetting to lock the door for poor Betty, and screamed, "Back to your rooms, all of you," to which his patients all howled. Lester darted down the hall when one of his female patients raced out of her bedroom naked and screaming. She ran past Lester like he wasn't there. "Simone!" he yelled, but she kept running, ran straight into the wall and fell backward, out cold and unconscious. "Jesus Christ, this is insane." And that's when old Fred walked by. Fred was a short and hefty old man who suffered from schizophrenia. He couldn't move too fast or scream too loud, so instead he cooed while throwing his hands up. "Fred, get back to your room." But Fred kept walking, and Lester shook his head. "Whatever." He opened the door to Clarice's room. Desmond was wrestling with her when he noticed Lester and slammed Clarice on the bed. Holding her down with such force, Clarice looked like she'd given up. "He's waiting for you, doctor," said Clarice as Lester pushed the syringe into her arm. "Take a nap, Clarice." Lester stretched his back and stood tall, noticing Desmond was nursing a bloody nose. "You okay?" Desmond nodded. "She got me good." "Well, no use crying over bloody nose. Betty's calling for reinforcements." As if on cue, Betty's voice crackled over the intercom, calling for a code red to the psychiatric ward. "Need you to get us back out there. I need you to get back out there. Gather the other orderlies and nurses. Priority is any patient causing harm to themselves or others." Desmond nodded, holding his hand over his nose. "Where are you going?" "To the source of all this craziness." "Wren?" "You know it." And without a moment's pause, he scuttled out of the room into the hall and made a beeline for the padded party room, as he liked to call it. A few days ago, after they found Wren clawing at his skin, tearing off little tendrils of bloodied flesh, Lester ordered his confinement to the padded party room. He'd been draping the tendrils across the windowsill. It was a gruesome scene, but Lester wasn't concerned about Wren. He was in a straitjacket. Nice. End of chapter 5. Now that's the first 5 chapters of Book 1, The Sleepy Hollow Incident. Boom, 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 boom. Hope you enjoyed it, as I said before. If you got questions, comments, anything like that, drop them down below. I'd love to, read what you got, read what you think, answer any questions that you may have, as long as it's not like further spoilers, whatever, but I'll probably indicate that in there. And yeah, we'll do this again next Thursday. And it'll take, I think, about, what did I say? Hold on. I read. Yeah, so it's going to be about 2 months. So it'll be every Thursday for about 2 months. We'll read like 5 chapters, If you want me to read more chapters, I could do that, if less. But I figure about 5 chapters each time. So about 10 weeks. Yeah, no more than 10 weeks. About within a little more than 2 months, and we'll be done with this. And then get into other stories. I'll probably do a couple character introductions here and there, all that good fun stuff. And this is going to be, so this is Thursday. In the future, this is going to be where I will read like short stories that I've been writing, news stories, things like that. And even I'm hoping to do interviews with other authors in here like once a month and get into the writing process, all that good fun stuff. So anyway, love you. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm Petey Oliva, as you should know at this point, so I don't think I have to keep saying that. Anyway, I love you. Happy Thursday. And I need to do this. There we go.